Good morning. This is the first report out of my 30-day challenge day one status. So session one was early in the morning, and which is sort of my standard time to do my French originally. And I would say this schedule of these three items is sort of a typical day for me for the last few years. So I didn't really notice the time spent. It was just sort of a typical day of practice for me. But more specifically, the first item here, the brief interview with Michel Onfray on Montaigne and essays. I picked this for two reasons. First, it's just clearly to get the exposure to spoken French in an interview. It's live and it's interesting material. But on another idea, the idea of trying to incorporate cultural references at the same time as increasing your listening comprehension. So here it's twofold. First, Michel Onfray is he's a modern populist philosopher in France. He's well known and is on quite a few shows and has a lot of input on society. And then the essays on Montaigne. Now, Montaigne, interestingly, the father of the modern essay, still plays a role in French thinking, although it was several hundred years ago. He still is relevant today. So you get two kind of cultural bumps during comprehension exercise. And also I picked this because Michel Onfray can be difficult, at least for me, to understand. His voice is deep and he speaks quickly in kind of a low voice, but he also has sort of this academic cerebral way of talking, and it's actually a good exercise. It forces me to listen carefully and try and understand the gist of the material. Although in this case, I was actually quite comfortable with this interview and the material. Now, it might have been because it was an interview and it was sort of direct where the questions are posed and Michel Onfray is sort of he's speaking contemporaneously, but it's only him speaking. So there's not a lot of dialogue or background noise. It's very quiet. So that does help. The second item here, the vocabulary SRS, I'd only note here is not only is it vocabulary building, hopefully with new words in the system, is I use this exercise to also work on pronunciation because the system has a built-in voice synthesizer, which is not advanced, but it pronounces correctly, so it is important. But I work on pronunciation at the same time as reinforcing vocabulary. So it kind of has a dual purpose. And then the last item here is sort of the standard, shadowing exercise. It's only this dialogue I use out of real life French, which for my target language in French, I think it's one of the best. I have an earlier video I did on that, but this exercise is I listen to the dialogue a couple times, and then I repeat it several times. Now the dialogue's again short, only 4 or 5 lines, but it's a very good representation of modern spoken French, which is going to be critical, I think, to my progression to a higher level. But it does take a little time because you need to repeat the inflection and the intonation of the speakers, at least for me, several times to be able to repeat it in the same way. Now, speed is always a problem because they're speaking at full speed French, very vernacular. But it's amazing. After a few attempts, you will be able to copy the sound. So this is now day one status session 2. Now you'll see on here several items. The first one is the brief interview with Alain Juppé and Pascal Boniface. Now this interview was actually frankly kind of dry, but again I tried to get some cultural or current events at the same time as developing listening comprehension. So here, Alain Juppé is a former prime minister in France, and the writer Pascal Boniface is a modern commentator. So it was useful, albeit a little dry, but they had different kind of vocabulary, different voices, so it's still beneficial and interesting. But again, it's always, I think, helpful for someone who's learning their foreign language, not only develop their language skills, but incorporate implicitly cultural references or current events. Now, the second item here, I did another session of vocabulary cards. Now, this set of cards actually it's different than the first set. This set actually has, now of course it has words and sentences included, but a lot of these cards are designed to introduce and reinforce grammatical rules as well as verb structure. So again, some things are just vocabulary and sentences, but many of them are designed to reflect reminders of grammar and verb structures. It's very helpful. Some of it's remedial because I had done it several years ago, but again, I think the basis of the SRS system is to track your progress and reinforce rules and words you've known in the past. That way you generally can shift from, the theory goes, from short term to long term. I do believe in that. I believe it's beneficial and does work. Next one, again, I just did another shadowing exercise. This one I had gone back to an earlier, I had not done it before, but it was a earlier dialogue from the Real French. And interesting, it was the same length, but wasn't quite as difficult as other ones, so it took a little less time. But again, I think shadowing is key and needs to be done regularly. Now, lastly, this is sort of an interesting little item here. I decided to do some out loud reading, which I think is critical. And here it was to read a poem from Jacques Prévert. Now, again, like I do in my other exercises, this was mainly about pronunciation and working your mouth muscles, your lips, to actually form the words consistently and relatively quickly for spoken French, or whatever your target language is. But again, I try to introduce a cultural element into every exercise to be the most effective one can. And here, Jacques Prévert is still famous. He was a famous poet in France. His poems they sort of reflect everyday French life. And some of them are very short and some are longer, but the words are interesting. He picks out, words that rhyme and phrases, and it's very good. You'll get a few good words and you'll practice them over and over again, and you'll see them. As an aside, the poem was Familial. It was very good and actually quite sad. But again, it's an interesting challenge to incorporate different cultural items into your learning plan. So the last session of the day, later in early evening, was a watching of a French film, One Wild Moment. This is a remake, as an aside, of a 1980s film, Blame It on Rio, but a French modern version. So I decided, even after the first day, that because my goal was to be able to watch a French film in French, I think it was important that I ensure that I, at least today, try to incorporate some French films and at least scenes every day of the learning challenge. So again, I don't know how this is going to go long term because I think it may be too much. I don't think so. I think since that's the goal, I'm going to just at least start doing that as a trying going forward. Now, a couple of things I want to say I learned from watching this film. So I did get maybe half of the dialogue. Now, clearly that's not enough to enjoy a film and understand it. But I did notice that in the scenes where there was not a lot of emotion, or I would say a lot of background noise, or if someone's fighting or they're telling jokes quickly and there's a lot of noise in the background, music, for example, or construction, that's where the trouble lies. There's some scenes where I understood a lot of it and it was very enjoyable. Other scenes, it was just too fast and too much noise to get all the sounds. But I want to say, too, is that shadowing I've learned quickly when watching about an hour of the movie was the shadowing that I've been doing the last few months. 4, 5, 6 months, is critical. I wish I would have known about it sooner because, at least for me, using the real life French material, the content is so specific in terms of cutting off sounds, eating syllables, eating certain sounds, deleting words, condensing the spoken language is exactly what I saw in the film. Now, again, and because the real life dialogues are also scripted and recorded, they have a very similar delivery and speech pattern as films. So now I'm seeing that shadowing, I believe, is going to be a key element, and not just my learning goals, but I think anyone who's trying to get to an advanced level of their language needs to do shadowing with real life material and content. And I would lastly add is the shadowing, I think, helps you learn in pieces certain phrases and words and techniques, because if you try to translate every sentence or a word in a film, you simply don't have time to do it. You won't understand the material and you'll just get lost. So it is critical, I think, to listen to material and copy material that is the same as you're going to see in real life. And then secondly, I want to point out that the vocabulary, so I think there's two theories about vocabulary, and I have said this in other videos. It is critical to know, people who can say you can have 800 word families and get around in a foreign language. That's generally true for a basic level. But to get to an advanced level, you need thousands or maybe tens of thousands of words, and you need to learn synonyms as well. And I want to give two examples here that, at least for me, were critical. The first one was, now I had heard several words and I put them in my head, looked them up, but two keywords to me were interesting because I knew them both, but not as they were used as slang in the film. So the first word is une caisse. And, to me, that's a case or something. But here, that's, I guess daily slang for the word car. So there's a scene where they're in the car and they're saying they're getting dressed in the car, but they're saying case and kiss, and I didn't understand it, and I realized, that they're using it in that context. It's a same word, different meaning, and without it, the scene makes no sense. And the second word that I heard several times, but I had to stop the video and listen to it again slowly, and then go look it up, was the word boîte. And boîte, it was a nightclub, not a box. And to me, the use of those common words that I know and that I learned is different in modern spoken French. And then the last word is, there's a scene in the film with a boar, and they're saying quickly sanglier. I didn't know that word for boar. I might have heard it, and I could deduce from the film that that's probably what they were saying because the boar was in the scene. But again, it happened several times with that word, so I did go verify that word. So again, the goal would be to, if that's a repeated item, I every day should be able to incorporate new words and phrases and uses of words from watching actual target films in my language, which happens to be French. And then the last item here, I said vocabulary from the film. I did have these few words, and I had a few other ones that I would go back, get meanings of those words, put them in sentences, practice them a few times, and then put them into my SRS system and save them for later. And I want to add something about the vocabulary. I don't stress too much about memorizing the word at that moment. Now, certain words, the way these were used, for example, stuck in my mind because it threw me to hear them that way. So that, I think I will remember those now for sure. The other more common words like bore or something, I put those in my SRS system and I don't worry about it because I know that the word will come back to me in the long term. So I say it a few times. I think I remember it, but if I don't worry about it too much. I know it'll come back to me. So final thoughts on day one. So first, this actual report out for only the first day is more substantive than I thought it would be. I had imagined a sort of factual report, but no, the feedback mechanism is substantial in itself. What I mean by that is you see something working even on the first day, even if slight, like what might work, or what might work better for you or to focus on. You notice a couple of new words. There's maybe a hint of understanding of something new. Again, that's on the first day. So I think the feedback mechanism is a critical way to increase your learning. Now, I'm not saying do it every day, but as part of my challenge for the 30 days, as part of the system, I need to do a report out. And actually, I can see the value in that in itself. Another thought I had is the intent of this was not to spend too much time I want to ensure a comfortable learning process. It wasn't meant to be, actually I would say the opposite. It was actually meant to be a relaxing learning process without too much effort to make it artificial where it takes away the enjoyment. And I can foresee the issue of making sure that the sessions are done, even if the total time is fine. If that makes sense. For me, since this is a challenge, it has to be done. So I have to get the time in and the sessions. But I can see that there's a balance, a tension between making sure you get enough time in to do the work to increase your level and to be comfortable. But at the same time, you don't want to ruin the learning experience by pushing it too much and losing focus on other parts of your life. But now, if it takes more time than you plan and you enjoy it, then by all means do it. Right, of course. It's just if your plan is to try to learn something in a short amount of time, or even over a longer period of time with consistent learning, there is that balance of pushing just enough, but not ruin the learning experience. And that's something I can even see on day one. Is there's that you have to learn that balance. Now, lastly, I want to emphasize: don't forget to split your time approximately between listening and speaking, even if you're only repeating things and speaking out loud. Now, depending on your personality, perhaps you speak as much as you listen. Well, you have to focus on both. It's easy to listen. You can listen to podcasts, watch a film. It is easy to listen to material. It doesn't mean you're necessarily understanding it, but it is easier to absorb content than to speak. But you must focus on, I would say, on half your time on your lip movement, mimicking the spoken version of your language. Again, it's easy to have the passive version, but you must be active. And even if you're not, particularly when you're speaking to someone in your lesson, hopefully you're having a weekly lesson or whatever your schedule is in your target language with the actual instructor, there you're doing both. You're speaking, you're listening. But on your off days, you do need to try to practice speaking, even if only to yourself. That's why I think when you do vocabulary building and you emphasize your pronunciation, or you do reading aloud, or you're shadowing, you really emphasize the lip movement and mimicking the sound of your language. And again, I would also add, not only does the speaking out loud and working on your pronunciation increase your ability to be comprehended, it actually will increase your ability to comprehend because you are mimicking the same sounds that you're going to hear on a daily basis. Well, thank you for your time, and I will see you next time for day 2 report out. Thank you.